As I was as I was asleep one night, the Lord woke me, and he placed the story of Joseph on my mind. So I knew that was where I was going. He's with us even when we're not fully prepared, and he points us in the right direction. So I'll tell you a little story. Once upon a time, there was a young man. He was the 11th youngest of 12 sons. He lived with his family in a place called Canaan, which would later become Israel, the Promised Land. So he lives there with his family, with his father, Jacob, and his mother, Rachel. And this young man's name was Joseph. Now, Joseph was at that time a bit of a telltale. He was also favoured by his father. He was the golden child, and he got all the best things. Now, his brothers all knew that he was the favourite. If you come from a larger family, maybe you felt your brother or sister was more favoured, and maybe you grew up a bit jealous, knowing that they got all the best bits and you got what was left. Or maybe you was the favourite. I know we're not meant to, but I think all parents have a favourite. Or maybe not. Or maybe not. If you don't think it was you, it wasn't. Anyway, his brothers grew jealous and they didn't speak to him very nicely after that. They were sick in the neck of him. But Joseph, either being quite naive or maybe more to antagonise his brothers. If we had brothers or sisters, you know what it's like to antagonise one another, always trying to get one over. Well, he would tell his brothers about his dreams that he gets in the night, especially the ones about all his brothers having to bow down to him and him ruling over them. And you can imagine that never went well. Well, his brothers finally had enough of young Joseph and decided they need to get rid of this nuisance. And they decided to teach him a lesson. So they have a little think about a suitable punishment. What is a punishment that we can, for the favourite child? One that would just teach him a little lesson and put him in his place. So they decide the only way to do this is to kill him and throw him in a big hole. Now one brother, good old Reuben, he has a bit of a second thought. And he manages to talk the other brothers out of killing him. But decides to let's still throw him in the hole. But maybe he'll be able to escape and make his way back home. Unfortunately, plans don't always end the way we think to start with. And a few travellers come past with their camels on their way to Egypt. And like you do, they sell Joseph to the travellers. And then they tell their father he's been devoured by a wild beast and torn to pieces. At this point, poor Joseph must have been thinking that life is pretty hard, not knowing what is going to happen. So what happens next is Joseph is taken to Egypt, where he's sold as a slave to a man called Potiphar, who is quite a high up kind of guy who works for the king. Now, God was with Joseph at this time and was looking after him. And Potiphar noticed this, and Joseph found favour in his sight. And he was looked after well. And in fact, he was made the head over this guy's house. He looked after all his possessions. He was Potiphar's right-hand guy. This was a good job, and most probably quite a good life for him. Now, Joseph probably wished he was back at home with his parents. Not too sure at that moment if he wanted to be around his brothers, but at least here he was no longer in a hole in a field or shackled in slavery. He had a job, he was being looked after. He was being looked after by one of the best guys in the land. And this job I mean, if you had a job of status, this was one of them. So this was a good job and most probably quite a good life for him. Things were on the up, far better than being in a hole. Now, as things are going good, young Joseph finds favour in the eyes of the opposite sex. A certain someone starts to take a fancy to him. The problem being is it happens to be his boss's wife. Now, Joseph has been brought up knowing right from wrong. His dad was pretty close to God and would have taught him what God sees as right and wrong. On top of that, he knows he's onto a good thing here, so he does the right thing and he says, "Oi, woman, no." But unfortunately, some women, I'm told, don't take no for an answer. When they want something, they expect to get it. So she goes on and on and on and on, continually trying to wear the poor little fella down. But Joseph, at this point in his life, is a man of honour. He's a good man. He sticks to his gun and he continues to say no. Joseph says to her, "In this house, I'm the man. Everything is for me to use as I see fit. My boss has given me everything to use as my own, except one thing, and that is you. So I'm not going to do the thing you want, as it will be a horrible sin, both against my boss and also against God. So sod off, love." But one day, when Joseph comes to the house, all the other workers, for some reason, are outside, nowhere to be found. And it's just Joseph and his boss's wife. And she tries it on, yet again. This time, trying to grab him by his clothing. Well, he ain't having it. And he gets out of there as fast as you can imagine. So fast, there's like a cloud of smoke coming behind him. But this woman's got an iron claw grip of his clothes, and as he scarpers, his clothes are left in her hand, but he's gone. But this can't be good for poor little Joseph, and it's not. Now, Potiphar's wife is out for revenge. She didn't like getting turned down, and I'm guessing she doesn't want her husband to know she's a deceitful temptress either. So she decides to get in there first and accuse Joseph of trying to be with her. The one thing Joseph was clear he wasn't prepared to do. But Potiphar, his boss, believes his wife, and he isn't prepared to hear poor Joseph out. He's angry. He feels his trust has been misplaced, which he has, just not by Joseph. And he has him arrested and thrown into the local dungeon. Just as things were going good for Joseph, this happens. One thing being sold into slavery, but now he's in prison for what could be the rest of his days. And he lives to 110, so that's quite a long way. But even as things get harder, God is still with Joseph. And Joseph finds favour with the prison guards. And Joseph is given the other prisoners to look after and organise. And everything seems to be going well for a bit. Well, as good as it can get when you're locked away. Now, Joseph has been in prison for a fair bit of time now. He's about 28. And he got sold into slavery when he was just 17. So he's been in prison for some time. Well, one day, two prisoners, one was the king's butler and one was the king's baker. Well, they both have a dream one night, slightly different dreams, and neither of them know what it means. Well, Joseph is no stranger to dreams. He knows how to interpret the odd dream as he does. So he tells the butler his dream means he will be restored to his place of honour. So he said, "Remember me when you're there. Put in a good word." And then he interprets the baker's dream and tells him, "Sorry, mate, but in 3 days they're going to cut off your head and feed it to the birds." Not sure I'd want to give that word of knowledge, but Joseph, being a faithful guy in everything he does, delivers it well. Well, a couple of days pass, and both the dreams come to pass. Shame about the baker, but at least the butler can now put in a good word and get Joseph out of prison. Hello? Well, guess what? The butler totally forgot. Poor Joseph. There was a glimmer of hope of getting him out of prison, and now it's all gone again. This walk with the Lord isn't all tulips and daisies. Now, a couple of years later, Joseph is now 30, and the king of Egypt has a couple of dreams. The king sends for his cleverest people and also the local magic acts, but none of them know what his dream means. When suddenly, 2 years after he came out of prison, the butler all of a sudden gets a bit of a guilt conscience, or Holy Spirit prodding, and he remembers old Joseph from the prison and how he got his dream right. So the king calls for Joseph. They give him a quick makeover. He was probably a bit stinky after 12 or so years in the local dungeon, so they give him a wash and a haircut, and off he goes to see the king. So the king tells Joseph the dream, and Joseph tells him that both his dreams mean the same thing. There will be an abundance of harvest for 7 years in Egypt. But following that, there will be a great famine of 7 years. Now, Joseph is a bit of a clever guy now. He's had some time to ponder in prison. And he also tells the king, the reason he had 2 dreams. One, because it's important and he needs to take notice, and it's going to happen soon. Joseph then continues to give the king a bit of advice. Just met him, but he's going to tell the king what to do. He tells him he needs to store the grain in the first 7 years and make sure that when the time of famine comes, there's plenty there. The king recognises the wise words of Joseph, and he realises that this man must have the Spirit of God with him. So he decides there's no better man for the job, and he makes him his second in command. He makes him basically the Prime Minister of Egypt. Nothing is beneath him, or everything is beneath him. Things are on the up again for Joseph. He's out of prison. He's now number 2 of all Egypt. Things are starting to go well again. Now, Joseph manages this famine greatly. He's stored up the grain, and now he's ready for the hard times. Now, because Joseph and Egypt were both prepared, the other countries around would also come to Egypt to buy grain. There we go. And as it also happened, Canaan was in famine too. So Jacob, Joseph's dad, sent 10 of his brothers all the way over to Egypt to buy some grain and to bring it back. Though he kept his youngest son back, Jacob, a bit scared that something might happen to him, still with the memories of what he thought had happened to Joseph all those years back. So one day, Joseph sees his brothers in Egypt, the same brothers that threw him in a pit and sold him to the passing strangers. The same brothers who, if it wasn't for what they had done, he wouldn't have spent nearly 13 years in prison. If it wasn't for him, he wouldn't have had the problems with Potiphar's wife. They were to blame for a lot, or at least instrumental in all the bad things that were happening or had happened to Joseph. He recognises his brothers, but they don't recognise him. He recognises his brothers, but they don't recognise him. After all, Joseph is probably looking a bit suave and sophisticated with his posh Egyptian makeover and his fancy clothes. So he decides to have a bit of fun with them. He accuses them of being spies to see them squirm. They're in a foreign country, and the king's second in command is accusing them of spying. This can't be good for them. So he sets them a task to send back the youngest brother. Then he will let them off. And he keeps one of the brothers, Simeon, back in prison. He ties him up and sends them on their way. So they agree, reluctantly, I guess. They give Joseph the money for the grain and they head back. Unknown to them, the money they paid for the grain had been put back in their sacks. When they realise they're scared, they will be treated like thieves of the king. This is not going to be good. So they return, they tell Jacob, and there's a wrestle of emotions for poor Jacob. Jacob's already lost Joseph. He's now potentially lost Simeon. And now he needs to risk the youngest, Benjamin, too. Jacob's a bit scared, so he decides to say no for the time being. But the famine gets worse and worse, and it continues. And they have no choice but to return and to confess about the money being returned to their sacks and just see what happens. So they come back, bringing the small brother as well. All's good, or so it seems, and they take more grain. But yet again, the money is returned on their way home. But also Joseph's silver cup, his favourite one, and probably worth a penny or two, has been placed also in one of the sacks. So they're on their way back to Jacob when all of a sudden Joseph's men apprehend them all. They check their bags and they find the cup and the money and march them all back to Joseph. They must be bricking it at this point. They know they haven't done anything wrong. Well, not as far as the grain and money. And when they get there, they plead and they plead. As Joseph wants to keep Benjamin there. But the brothers can't bear the thought of returning without him to Jacob. And they plead and plead some more. In the end, Joseph reveals himself. He says, "Hi, I'm your brother. The one you thought you'd done away with, that's me." And he explains that everything they did for the sake of evil, God has used for good. And then he tells them, "Go get your dad, Jacob, my dad, your dad. And why not come back and live happily ever after with me in the land of Egypt?" It becomes a good day for Joseph, who through ups and downs has his family back with him. Living in a land of luxury, they've got food, and the family's all one. His brothers have seen the error of their ways and have repented. Jacob gets his whole family back, including the son who was lost and is now found. So why do I recount this story? Well, I remember when I came to the Lord, it was a time of despair. Just come out of a bad marriage, a godless marriage, and was coming to grips with what that meant and trying to ensure I was still part of my daughter's life. And in that place, in that pit, the Lord found me and he led me to church. With that came some peace. Things were a little bit on the up. I'd found a good place. I found people who would look after me. But with that peace that had been missing in my life. And that belief that everything is going to be all right now. Because I knew God was with me. And sometimes when God's with you, you feel invincible. You feel like you can take on the world. You can take on anything. But you know what? No one told me at that time it wasn't going to be plain sailing. No one told me life would get harder. No one told me I would come under attack. No one told me I would have to continue to fight. No one told me sickness and disease would still try to pull me down. Like Joseph, there are bad times. There are times of struggles, times of hardships, things we didn't see or things we never thought could or would happen to us seem to happen. Now, we've all come to know Jesus in different ways, maybe through tragedy, maybe through loneliness, maybe through loss, maybe through growing up in the faith of our parents, passed on, like Jacob did to Joseph. But whatever way we came to the Lord, why do those around us, especially at the start, neglect to tell us that it's not all going to be a bed of roses? We want to tell everybody about the goodness of God, how good it is to know Jesus. Yet sometimes, and a lot, we keep quiet about the testing. And the testing does happen. I mean, we can be too vocal sometimes with those who don't know God yet. We remind them what will happen if they don't seek the Lord or come to know him or continue to walk in sin. But what about the new believer? The one that's trying their best, the one that's growing, the one that says they believe and wants to know more, the one at the start of their journey. Why do we forget to tell these ones about the troubles to come, the hard times that are bound to come their way? Maybe we're scared. We're so eager to bring them to church, bring them to Christ, that we're scared that if we tell them the truth and tell them how hard it will be, that we'll push them away. But are we doing them an injustice by not telling new believers from the start to prepare for those troubles? Jesus himself says to count the cost in Luke chapter 14. But don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there is enough money to finish it? Otherwise, you might complete only the foundation before running out of money, and then everyone would laugh at you. They would say, there's the person who started that building and couldn't afford to finish it. Are we setting people up to fail if we don't tell them the full cost at the start? You see, we shouldn't be afraid to tell people about the cost. We shouldn't be afraid to tell people about the troubles to come. They are allowed to happen. And they happen for a reason. They will bring good. The troubles, even though they won't feel like it at the time, even though we may not be able to see it, especially if we're in the midst of it, and some of us may be now, but rest assured, God's word says these things will bring goodness. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose, Romans 8:28. You see, God has a predestined plan for our life, but that plan has to come into place for us to walk according to his purpose he has for us. And for that to happen, he needs us to change. He needs us to evolve. He needs us to get stronger, not always physically, but mentally and spiritually. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Ephesians 6:12. You see, we need to get our minds out of looking at the physical appearance. We are spiritual beings taking on spiritual things, and the things of the flesh are trying to pull us down and pull our attention away from the purpose and plan that God has on our lives. See, God is building an army, and you, me, we are his best soldiers, and he is getting us fit for battle. God is preparing us through the battles, through the hardships. He is making us stronger, evolving our character. He is making us more like him. Not only so, but we are glory in our suffering, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. Romans 5:3-4. See, God is forming us in his image by change. For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, to knowledge self-control, to self-control perseverance, and perseverance godliness, and to godliness mutual affection, and to mutual affection love. For if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. 2 Peter 1:5-8. You see, God needs us to empty ourselves of what we were. He needs to take us on that journey. He needs to transform us. He needs to empty us so we can become more of him. He needs us to be like Christ, who, being born in the likeness of a man, emptied himself and took on the form of a servant. Philippians 2:7. We move church buildings soon, and as part of that, we will need us to evolve from receivers to servants. I ask, has God added here to shape us and to build us, to get us ready to be what he needs us to be for the next chapter? Have we been storing away the grain, ready to open our storehouses to those in need, to those who are going through a famine? Is God preparing us for the next phase? But not just in church life, in life in general. Are we storing away the promises of God? Are we eating the word when we've got plentiful? So that when the troubles come, we can look back, rely on what he's taught us. Can we walk in authority in the times of troubles because we ate plentiful and stored away in the times of blessing? Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Proverbs 3:5. We need to soak in the Lord's word. We need to feed on it. We need to live it. We need to become it so that it will get us through all the hardships. So wherever you are today, and wherever you're in a land of plenty, or whether you're in a time of famine, remember God is still with you. As God was planning ahead when Joseph was in the pit, God is with you. As God was looking for the perfect owner when Joseph was in slavery, God is with you. As God was with Joseph when he was in prison and gave him favour, God is with you. Even when we don't see it, God is there. So fill up in the time of plenty, soak in the word, pray, commune, and be ready for the time of famine. And you will be equipped. You will be strong. You will be able to walk on into danger and know that the Lord has me, has you, as a child of God. And I'll end this with a young shepherd boy as he walked towards the dangers that had conquered all the others that had walked before him. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Psalm 23:4. Amen. Thank you.